Welcome to the Roundtable Consult. I'm your host, Dr. Mark Williams, and I'm joined by my wonderful co-host, attorney Sonia Madison. Sonia, it's been some weeks since I've seen you, it seems like.
I know it's been a hole in your heart. Sorry to have to do that to you.
Yeah, the hole through which blood pumps. Exactly. Yes, it's been the life of me. Thank you.
Whatever. You know what's crazy is this week has been it's really been crazy. Did you see any footage of that Baltimore Bridge coming down?
I did. I
I
did. That
couldn't stop
was,
watching it.
it
Like,
looked like it was fabricated, like, AI, you don't believe your lying eyes. And so,
wow. Thankfully, I think over 60 million has been approved by the federal government for repairs. But some of the aftermath of listening to the mayor, and all of a sudden the new N word is DEI. I'm just shocked how we have taken such a tragic incident and turned it into a political and racial strife. I don't know why I'm shocked.
right.
This is
I'm
the
trying to
world we
figure
have.
out why. We
But
do
I
this
was just
every
like,
week.
are you serious?
You know how it goes. You know how it goes.
Are you seriously blaming this tragedy on the fact that a mayor who was duly elected is black? Is that
Yeah.
where we're going with this? I just couldn't believe it.
Yeah. Well, welcome to America. Uh, and so, hey, this week, yesterday, I released my album, One Touch. It's the first in a series of this year that I'll be releasing called the Reconciled series. And so, my whole belief is that I know you didn't ask me about what's
Hey, I
special
never
about the
do, but
project
go
or anything, but if you won't interview me, I'll interview me.
ahead.
But no, I'm excited to release it because it's my first full project releasing since probably 2016.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I did release a single in 2020, but I start looking at where we are as a society right now, and this holy weekend when we celebrate the death and resurrection of Jesus. Jesus died so that we could all be reconciled back to God. And so I think at this point we need to be reconciled not only to God, but to each other, and sometimes in many cases to ourselves. And so these three different projects or series, chapters or volumes of the Reconciled series, will focus on that reconciling to oneself, um, conforming to the image that God created us in. The other one will be reconciling with each other. Particularly, I've got a couple songs that's going to deal with the marital relationship, reconciling the marital relationship, reconciling the relationship between parent and child, and also just reconciling our relationships between our fellow man. And then finally, it's just been reconciled to God. The last series would be. So I'm excited about it. It's my first CD release in many years, and you guys, it is available for digital download and streaming on all your major platforms. So check it out. Let me know what you think about it.
Congratulations. Are we not done with your promo? Just want to make sure you've gotten your promo out.
There's probably some more in there,
Probably
but
more you want to
I'm
add.
gonna let it go. I'm gonna let it go for now so that we can move on since we have a guest today.
Well, I do want to ask you because we've got some medical stuff that's come in light. I know the Supreme Court is looking at what is it called, Mifeprex. Can you talk anything about it related to this abortion
The
pill?
abortion pill. Oh,
I might be mispronouncing the name.
yeah. No, I can't talk much about
Well,
it.
what I gather from, because I did look at some of the or hear some of the oral arguments, and what I'm gathering, one, there's a standing issue because it's a lot of these doctors, and I think a medical professional association is saying, hey, we're the ones being harmed, which is, and maybe you could speak even on that. It's weird for me when a doctor is saying, I'm injured by the fact that I have the option to prescribe something for someone as if
Mhm.
they don't have the autonomy not to make the prescription, but maybe they don't. Is that, are you usually as a doctor forced to prescribe certain medications that you feel could be harmed to someone?
I don't know that we're ever forced to prescribe a medicine that could be harmful to someone. And I presume this is the argument that the pro-life people are making and saying that this pill, and correct me if I'm wrong, saying that this pill will harm an unborn fetus or an embryo at this stage, frankly. But it's a pill that will take, if you take early enough on in pregnancy, it will have a self-administered abortion. And so, of course, our pro-life friends who would like to ban all types of uh, abortions in any way,
Contraceptives
shape,
in
or
any way.
form.
Yeah.
Right. Would like to ban this one as well. Misoprostol is what it's called. But again, it's all it is I think it's a prostaglandin. It's sort of like a hormone that if it's in too high concentrations, it's not compatible with sustaining pregnancy. And so I think that's one of the things that you know, it'll be
But
interesting how the
they
Supreme
touch
Court comes
upon
out
that.
on this. Say that again.
They do touch upon that, but the two issues are, okay, one, do they have standing? And it looks like, at least from what I'm gathering, they may go ahead and eliminate the case off that alone, because again, I don't know how these doctors and these associations are arguing that they're injured because of this medication. But then of course the second one is
But let me speak on that now. If
okay,
if you have a patient who comes to you and says, "I want a prescription for this medication," and you're their primary care doctor, and you could possibly feel like you're being forced to have to write a prescription that will result in what you believe is murder. But the reality of it is that if you don't write the prescription, they're going to go to somebody else who will. And in fact, I think they're some word about online pharmacies without being able to
right. And that
achieve
is the
this
thing.
medicine without a prescription. And so,
That is the thing, an in-person prescription isn't required. But that's why I say I think also that that issue may eliminate it. And because even what you're saying is, hey, you could feel obligated. But again, unless medical school is telling you you are obligated to make this prescription, I don't know if this speculation would be sufficient enough. But also going into the cases about the unease in access. So it started, I think in 2000, you could get it within 7 weeks. They increased it, I want to say around 2016 to 10 weeks. And now, like we said, you can get it without a in-person prescription. And so but through the history, because they're suing the FDA, through the history, it's shown that, at least what the FDA is saying, people are not being harmed. We've done extensive testing. We've done all whatever they feel like to meet the requirements, and no one has, or at least no one has been harmed to the point where we should be here before the court. But what's also interesting with, as we talk about often, is the fact that for the most part, a lot of these Republicans are trying to limit the ability of these federal administrations. I mean, we've seen that with the Environmental Protection Act. We're seeing it again with the FDA. We're just seeing a push to limit the ability for these administrative agencies to
you say that
enforce.
like it's a bad thing. Some people who are listening to you will say, "Hey, this is a good thing. This is what needs to happen." Of course, that's what we're supposed to be doing. So,
Well, and again, it's a matter of perspective. I mean, I
mhm.
think there's always a line in which, yes, there's some overreach. But if you're saying, oh, the overreach is based on based on this idea that, hey, abortion should automatically be legal, and no law or no court has said that abortion in all forms are legal, then the administrative agency isn't going beyond their reach. But I mean, I'm not saying that, that's universal. I definitely know that there are instances in which they can be checked. But in this instance, I just see that there's just a push of, hey, no, we're going to continue to use the courts to enforce anything that we want instead of going through the legislative bodies.
Yeah. So when you act of conservative, so
So
it's
you're
either
breaking up.
the
You're breaking up, at least on me. I don't know if I'm breaking up on you. Um, But and I did, before we went bringing our guests, and this is hopefully we'll kind of turn our guests. Tell me, have you heard any thoughts or have any thoughts that relates to P. Diddy? Because that has also been a big thing that has come about. And for some of our listeners, we talked a little bit last year about when his girlfriend, Cassie, or ex-girlfriend, filed suit a day before, I think that might not have been her, but anyways, filed suit. Then all of a sudden, after she settled immediately the next day, Diddy settled the next day. And here we've got his producer who's filed suit earlier this year. And now we've got federal government or federal agents that have raided his house. And I think the beginning of the year, we talked about there's a reckoning happening as it relates to various industries. And we may have touched on the music industry following
Mhm.
Cat Williams' interview. But what are your thoughts have been so far? Because I know we also brought it up with TD Jakes.
I don't I try not to make too many speculations about these things because you don't know what's
You
going on
don't know.
behind these closed doors. And yes, can some of this actually be all fabricated and alleged against him? That I come down to this. We only know one truth in this country, and that's the truth that is established in the court of law. And anything beyond that, when it comes to enforcement of the laws, the court has the final say about what's truth. Now, us as spiritual beings and followers of God understand that there is a different truth. And often that real truth, the truth being Jesus and the truth being, that which is spiritual, um, doesn't line up with the truth that justice identifies as the truth. And as you know, as an attorney, it doesn't matter what is true or not. It just a matter if you can prove it.
First of
And
all, I
what you
don't
can
know
prove.
that that's
You do know
the
that.
truth matters.
Truth doesn't matter. It's just what you can prove. It doesn't matter if you can't prove it. You understand that the truth doesn't matter in our justice system if you can't prove it, and if you can't prove it the right way using the appropriate vehicles and mechanisms. And so, what I do, I rely on what the government is saying. I mean, if the government and that's I know that sounds like
I
sheepish to a
know.
lot of people,
We
but
talked about that.
yeah.
It presents a bias to the defendant when you automatically rely on the prosecution and the police officers, right?
No doubt. And so I reserve judgment until after, the trial has gone in place. If they had a duly executed search warrant and went into his onto his premises and seized property, they had some duly some legitimate cause for doing this and getting the court order. So I have to say, well, we'll see what it all comes out. It's the same way I responded to Donald Trump. P. Diddy, you in the same situation. When you get your house investigated or raided by and your property seized by the federal government, you probably have done something that warrants it.
Well, and so we're clear, he has not been indicted or convicted of anything. He's being investigated under sex trafficking charges. And the reason why I say kind of introduce our guest, because a lot of times sex trafficking has is linked to use of children and exploitation of children. And I know they have talked about what's been shown is his relationship with Usher, his relationship with Justin Bieber. And again, nothing has been proven, nothing has been alleged. But these charges, or at least the lawsuit that his producer is saying is, hey, when I was there living with him, he abused me, he took advantage of me and the like. And so, I was recently watching kids in bars or kids behind bars. And in that show, it talks about particularly Miller versus Alabama, which said, kids have a certain cognitive, and you could probably speak more on this, but certain cognitive skills that haven't quite yet been developed for them to understand the extent to which an action like murder or killing someone, the consequences of that. And so for kids that have received life convictions without the possibility of parole, and by kids, they mean people under the age of 17, they could have that overturned or at least relooked at based on this idea that their cognitive functions have not been developed. And so I want to bring in our guest to talk about what he's doing. And his name is Julius Cave. He's a program manager for the Literacy Lab's Leading Men Fellowship here in Atlanta, Georgia. He is responsible for helping to recruit, hire, train, and place young men of color ages 18 to 24 to serve in pre-kindergarten classrooms to provide evidence-based literacy support to close literacy gaps while helping to diversify the educator pipeline. He is a veteran educator who brings over a decade of classroom, administrative, and nonprofit experience. And prior to joining the Literacy Lab, he was a Leading Men Fellowship and served as the program director for the Jumpstart program at Georgia State University. He has participated or been part of the education system, and not only here in Atlanta, but also in Memphis and in Houston. So thank you so much, Julius, for joining us today.
Appreciate y'all for having me. Great to be here, Mark and Sonia.
No problem. So let's start with what got you into education. What compelled you to say, hey, this is where I want to serve my community?
Yeah, absolutely. So, for me, it was a calling. Kind of a little bit of background. Grew up in Allendale, South Carolina, and people ask, "What do you want to be? What do you want to do when you grow up?" And I didn't give much thought, but through, I'd say pediatrician, right? Yeah, want to be a doctor, but then later on, I'm not going to all that school. So my hats off to you, lawyers and doctors, Mark and Sonya, all the additional schooling to get there. But what I didn't realize was that was about, really wanting to work with kids. And so, um, being around educators, my mother, my grandmother, others in my family was always something that was around me from a professional standpoint. And then as I continue to go through school, um, it was just something that continued to tug on me. Then went to college, tried to get away from it, tried to be too cool and plan on doing some other things. And they just didn't work. And so once I finally committed and answered that call of being an educator, things just began to really fall in place for me in my life.
And when you're from your experience, what has been the issues in education? Because I take it when you study it, you might have started with this whole concept of, oh, I can shape the minds of the future of these kids, but now you're probably seeing, okay, there's a lot more pushback, there's a lot more policy, there's a lot more politics. So what are some of the issues that you see facing education right now?
Yeah, a couple of things, and my work right now is around, of course, literacy, as a huge key component of it. Literacy rates, there's some work to do locally and across this country, especially for students of color or students coming from backgrounds and experiences and communities experiencing racial and economic inequities. And then on the other side, when we think about it from a, I think there's the challenge is it's time for some more. We need some more nuanced conversation. We need more conversation about, what are some of the real issues? What are some of the challenges? And come together collectively, come together more collectively, and look at how we solve those problems.
One of the things that I see, I remember growing up, I didn't read a lot or didn't have a lot on the curriculum as relates to Black authors or relates to certain history beyond, okay, this is when Black people came. And then we talk about slavery and civil rights. And now we see in Florida, we've got books being banned, we've got DEI programs being taken away, we've got even history being curtailed. And so even for your perspective, because I imagine people may define education differently. I mean, how do you see it? And do you feel as if what's currently in place is cultivating the, I guess, needs that you feel some of these kids should have?
Yeah, yeah. I think our challenge is that when it comes to a lot of the conversations, and from my perspective, you're right. Like we define it differently. Too often we don't center the child in those respective conversations, right? I think it's from an adult perspective. I think it's from a politics perspective. I think it's, because of certain stories we amplify to be respective of what we think is more of the whole. And I think we begin to move away from that, right? Like, so even the idea of book bans, no matter where you stand on that from a political perspective, are we have to ask ourselves, right? Are book bans more important, or making sure that children can read, right? And so if the same energy and conversation about that switches from, what books and should we ban books or not, to our children getting the skills early on, getting the support early on to be developed as readers, if we put more energy and passion in that, then we see results. I think that would add to us more as a society.
And I take it when a child or pre-K kindergarten, is that around the time to learn to read? Or would you say, I mean, because I don't know.
Yeah,
Is that
yeah,
around
yeah.
that?
And that's a great point. We'll take it. So, um, my history, quick. So when I was, in school and telling my age a little bit, right? Like kindergarten was half day, right? It wasn't full
Oh.
day. Yeah. And so pre-K or preschool and these things, those weren't. It wasn't as prominent as it is now, and it was just kind of, hey, people saw it as babysitters watch work. But what we know now, and you ask learning to read, like literacy skills, work around literacy with kids can happen as soon as they're born, right? And even in the womb, as we're reading and thinking about language and those things, even before they're out of the womb. But once born, like we have opportunities to help, thinking about conversation, thinking about how we talk around kids, like they are sponges, and so even when they get into pre-K, they've already been hopefully and ideally been interacting with some of these skills that they need to develop. Um, And so getting pre is now starting to refine it more and move more towards what we think of as, say, looking at words on a page and is reading, but the skills needed for that have started even before that.
Which then makes it seem like, because when we talk about marginalized communities and socioeconomic classes, I imagine you're also saying to some degree, if you're not starting in the womb or outside the womb, you're already kind of placing your child at a disadvantage. And I'd imagine when they go to a pre-K program or when they go to a kindergarten program, I don't think, you tell me though, I don't think the teachers are there to say, hey, we don't want you to read. But I'd imagine education probably encompasses more than what a teacher can do. And so to some degree, I mean, what role does either your environment, your family structure play? And how can parents be a little bit more proactive, before pre-K? Because it sounds like you're saying he needs to start as soon as you start talking because they're sponging off your words.
Yeah, yeah. And I'll switch a little bit. I want to, less of say at a disadvantage, right? Because and I say that because sometimes I think we point fingers at parents and assign. And I know that's not what you're saying here, but just in a broader conversation, especially in certain communities, we start to assign guilt and blame and shame, right? And so I think we got to think about it as an opportunity, right? And so no matter the family structure, whether the people that are involved, parents, grandparents, whoever it is, they love their kids, right? And parents and folks want the best for their kids. And so I think it's an opportunity to share this in a way in which we encourage more reading, with children, support for parents and other caregivers around implementing and encouraging vocabulary and the vocabulary they use around students. So those are just two examples, but I think it's a great opportunity, like I said, to share and encourage and support more. Now, the other thing I say is that sometimes even with that, while we want to be careful because we point blame and fingers at parents in certain communities and structured situations sometimes, is that for students, for families of means that are in a little bit better financial position, right? Like they can afford to say send their children to certain spaces, environments, and provide say extra support and everything. And so it's not so much that they know more or just per se reading more or doing more with their kids. It's just also sometimes that there's a little bit more means. And so we have an opportunity to encourage and support and wrap our arms around families, caregivers, teachers, educators, everyone that's working with our students and support in that way.
A question for you: why is it important then that that we have more Black educators and representation in terms of diversity, ethnicity, things why is that important for the learning experience?
Yeah, one for a couple of things, and with our program and with our organization overall, the Literacy Lab and our program Leading Men Fellowship, a lot of what we talk about or use or cite some studies, right? It says for Black students that have a Black teacher in elementary school, as early as elementary school, there's a decrease in the drop rate for those students. There's a increase in the interest in going to college, right? And so, and especially for Black boys, there's even a higher decrease in the dropout rate for them when they have a Black teacher early on, right? There's other studies and things coming out that talk about the difference between even referrals for special education or just the learning environment that it relates to when students have a teacher at some point in their journey that's of the same racism. And so it's super important for that standpoint. I think as we drill down even a little bit more and think about having more men of color, more Black men as educators, is because right now the representation nationally, we're talking about less than 2% being Black men that are teachers in classrooms. And so we know that there are a number of students that could use this support, that could benefit from having a Black male educator. So that's part of what we want to do, is encourage that, as well as more male educators of color.
So I understand, and thanks for sharing the outcomes data, but is there some understanding of what the influence is and how that influence, how those outcomes are achieved? Is it, I'll hear some people, I can imagine some people saying, well, one of the reasons why you may see a higher success rate is because they're actually, now the whole concept between DEI is that you're dumbing down things for people, or you're lowering the standards so that more people can achieve. I presume that that's not the reason why, but has there been studies to understand how having a person of your ethnicity might impact the psyche and the psychology of learning?
Um, I mean, I think there's, I'm sure some of that's out there is not I'm as familiar with. Um, so definitely don't want to quote anything there. But I think if you'd ask my opinion, if that's all right, I think there's something to say about what that classroom environment is like. I think there's just something to say, and I think that's a great point around, some of the DEI pieces and some other pieces that assume there's a difference in terms of standard. And just showing, especially thinking about the young men that work as fellows in our program, other educators that I know, it's providing an environment that is about high standards and achievement and success, but doing it in a way, building relationships, providing support, listening, and being someone that they can relate to, someone that can understand, and someone that can say, hey, wait a minute, what we're seeing here isn't necessarily um, you know, something wrong, or a student is um, having certain challenges. It's not something so wrong the student. It's something, maybe it's how we set up our other things that we can think about to better sort them.
What about you in the classroom? Because I mean, you taught in middle school in Houston and Memphis, here in Atlanta. I mean, when you're talking to some of your fellow teachers, are they typically say, "Oh, I'm having a hard time with so and so," and you're finding, actually, he's sponging off me. He's eager to to learn or to hear what I have to say? Or do you find that consistently you're having the same issues with your fellow teachers when you talk in any of those cities? I mean, I don't want you to put the school out there, but
Yeah.
as someone who's been in the classroom, did you see a difference?
And thinking about, say, how students responded to me versus others.
Yes.
Um, Sometimes, right? But I also think that there's some students that were in my classes that responded differently, say with other teachers, right? And so I think for any teachers, right, the practice of kind of being mindful of who students are, how can you build relationships, how can you understand them as best as possible, and that willingness to do so. So I think that's part of it. Have I been in situations or experiences where um, I think that by me being present, I've been able to, say, listen to a student, or understand something that maybe their teacher at the time didn't, or others didn't. Then I would absolutely say so. And I think there's others on the flip side of that for me. And I think that goes to the point of having a diverse educated workforce, right? Like we have students coming from a number of different backgrounds, a number of different scenarios, a number of different situations, and so when your team's a primary makeup is, say, one race, or one gender that's not diverse, then the challenge is, how are we listening to students? Are we understanding students? Who can provide a different perspective? Who can help to say, hey, this is maybe what's going on here, or you know what, this student didn't feel comfortable sharing with you, but they're with me. And it's not a me versus you thing. I'm just sharing to help you with your practice, and vice versa. So yeah, I think that's why also kind of that importance of having a diverse educated workforce.
So as I hear you speak, the one thing that's just running through my mind is this whole concept of implicit bias. And we talk about implicit bias as it relates to the judicial system and law enforcement. But I imagine it's very critically important to be able to identify those instances of, or the propensity for implicit bias to actually occur within the classroom. And I'll tell you just my experience, first experience with this as a fifth grader. They were just integrating schools, and that's putting age on my that's dating me right there. But and so all of a sudden, some of us from this black neighborhood were bused into this white school, and the implicit bias was pretty evident that at that moment there was a hierarchy. There were white girls, white boys, black girls, black boys. And sadly, that same implicit bias actually impacted, I think, some minority administrators. The principal at that school herself was a Black woman, but you could see how that implicit bias is not restricted to just one particular race, to say that if you're white, you're going to be implicitly biased against somebody else. But because society has so indoctrinated us and caused us to believe that a particular race behaves this particular type of way or does this type of thing, that societal impression then filters into your interactions with your students. Are you seeing this as a problem, or is this something that is actively discussed within your field?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Around training, just around implicit bias, and I appreciate hearing more about your experience and even starting that piece. We've heard about it, judicial systems and other systems. This piece about implicit bias. So we think about education, is connected in the same way, meaning that we hear, and where the implicit bias comes from, it comes from perceptions. One could argue media, one could argue different ways, and so it shows up. These are people in education are hearing and seeing some of the same things. And so when we look at some of how we can talk about Black boys, for example, how the perception of Black boys in schools, right? There's a study, a Notre Dame professor was talking recently about how there's even been a difference in the actions of Black boys, and their white peers can be doing the same thing, and how it's perceived one versus another, right? And that's as early as 4 and 5 years old. And so if we think about that in the school experience, that's already happening. What does that say about the school experience for Black boys, right? And so when we show up and continue to work, continue to go through school, what is that continued perception? How are we being treated? What is our school experience? And so we kind of hear it on the back end when we're talking about our fellowship. We're out here recruiting and talking about the experience with young men. There's been trauma. There's been experiences, how they've been perceived and just treated throughout their time. And it's a question of, why would I even go back to work in this particular field?
Which leads to that question, like, what is hindering Black men from joining education? Because I know that part of your program is encouraging them to join and encourage them to be in the school system. So what is preventing them from using that or seeing that as a field?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is just what I was sharing just a moment ago, that we really have to talk about what this school experience is like. The reasons, with implicit bias, explicit bias, other reasons. Like, what is a school experience about, like, for young men, young Black boys that are going through? Are they nurtured? Are they supported? How are they perceived? What are referrals to, say, special education? The discipline referrals. So we got to really have a conversation about what that experience is like. As part of that, the encouragement early on to go into the field of education. I It's for a number of our fellows that come to the program and conversations with them. We hear things like, "Yeah, I enjoy working with kids. Yeah, I was start thinking about coaching, or I was thinking about doing something else." But it's never, well, I won't say never. It's rarely, yes, I was specifically thinking about teaching. And so what that communicates to me and us is that, these young men have had these interests, but have rarely just been encouraged to say, explore that and become an educator. So those are where I would start, those two areas.
One of our regular listeners, he's a proud public school geometry teacher, he says
Come
here
on,
on a
come
comment,
on, come
and
on.
happened to be a good brother, as a fraternal brother of mine as well. But he makes a comment. He says that the lack of money and respect plays into it as well. Can you comment on that, and how can we overcome some of those things,
Yeah, yeah,
or at least the
absolutely.
perception of lack of respect?
Yeah, 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 definitely. Let's go with lack of money first, and I think that's straightforward. We got to pay educators more, right? For what?
But be specific about what is more,
Yeah, yeah. I don't look. I'm an educator, so I'm gonna say let's start folks off 6 figures and above, right? Like, I'm trying to let's go there, but I think it's thinking about when we really understand what what teachers are doing in a classroom, let's think about the pandemic and let's be real. There were parents that once they got, their one kid at home that was like, yo, open the school back up. They got
Right.
to go, right? We got to get them out. Now, think about this. A teacher has 20 to 25 of your kid and other kids in their classroom at one time, right? And that is charged and responsible with teaching them. Take a subject like geometry, where, um, you know, students are coming with different backgrounds and experiences, and that teacher's charge to move them from a point A to point B. And I mean, it's demanding and tough work, right? And that's just teachers. I mean, we have paraprofessionals that are, I mean, the salaries of say paraprofessionals who are doing amazing work is something that we got to increase. Counts like everybody involved are doing a lot of work and draining work. You take home, some of the situations your students are dealing with, their families, the emotions involved, and you hold on that. So that's the money piece. And also on the respect, I mean, it's a yeah, we got it as a society. I think again, we talk about pointing the finger. A lot of times we point it at teachers when we think about daily work of teachers. Sometimes, we just don't really appreciate it in that way. And a lot of conversations that I've had with teachers and educators, when they talk about leaving the classrooms, money's a factor. It plays in there, of course, but a lot of times it's more related to respect, how they're respected at their school, respect they're getting from others. It's less. It's a lot of times can be linked under that. Yeah. So those are some things I would say. I think for us, some of the things that we're trying to do with our program and with our young men is that one, again, we're talking about 18 to 24-year-old young men without a bachelor's degree, um, who are coming to us sometimes right out of high school, and is saying, and we're paying 17 an hour. Um, and so it's look like comparing when we look at where these young black men, the other opportunities, things like retail are the top job areas for black men here in Atlanta, and some others. And so we're trying to be comparable and in some cases pay more than them to help them when they're starting out. And then we also do what we call professional learning groups. And, one of the series we're doing around right now is financial literacy. And so it's having even more nuanced conversation to say, look, I get it. I want to pay you much, much more. I'm encouraging you to go in this field. I want much, much more. But let's start early and let's figure out ways to prepare you and position you so that, as my grandmother would say, it's not always about how much you make, is what you do with what you make.
Yeah, you mentioned the mentoring, and I imagine if there are some groups in which you guys are staying connected, encouraging each other and helping each other, I'd imagine that could help. And so, in addition to what you're doing, are there groups that either can mentor men or can support Black teachers or Black male teachers so that when they are faced, because inevitably you're going to be faced with challenging students. I mean, and that is what it is. You're going to be faced with students that are going to be disrespectful, that you can still lean into some of your colleagues so that they can keep you encouraged.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So the mentoring piece is huge. That's something that we look to do as we talk about, like I said, the wrapping around the fellows in our program. Shout out to organization Profound Gentlemen. Their organization that works nationally to support specifically male educators of color to help retain more in the education space. And so that's one that comes to mind. Also, locally here in Atlanta, um, outside, there's groups like Black Male Educators Talk, that provides a space for Black male educators to connect and grow and talk together. And then even outside of that space, here there's organizations like Black Man Lab, on Dugu. Chop It Up is regularly meets for Black men to come together on one another. Brothers United ATL is another group, and so some of these places exist. So for me, it's getting the opportunity to be in those spaces has helped me as a professional, and so it's something I highly encourage for others. Is being a part of some of these groups, looking at meeting, if even if you're not here in Atlanta, looking in your community and spaces, because it is important. Like, so you deal with certain things, you bring home the emotion, you hold these things, and so how do you come into a positive space with others that will support you, and then in turn, we could be mentors to others. And so the flip side of that is, right, like, if there's people are, of course, listening. Part of our organization, we continue to provide opportunity. We want to provide opportunity for people to want to mentor our young men that want to be in discussion and dialogue and support with our young men as well.
Yeah,
And
oh, go ahead.
well, I was gonna say, you also mentioned coaching, which is and athletes, and I don't know if in your experience, they don't want to do education, but is there another field that a lot of Black boys prefer to go into? And if there's a way, because even with coaching, like you talk about, there is still an element of education in that. And as last week we talked a little bit about the NCAA and collegiate athletes, and Nick Saban saying, hey, I just feel like they're so focused on money. And I know you mentioned that was one reason why they don't go into education. These athletes are so focused on money that I can't teach them. But again, you are teaching them. And so how can we even get coaches or get sports or whatever fields that these Black boys are striving to go into to get them to express or mention the importance of education?
Yeah. I think it's a great point, right? Like coaching is an example. I think we talked about a little earlier, school counseling. Like under the education umbrella, there are a lot of options, right? It's not just say being a classroom teacher. And so one, exposure is important. Sharing some of these options, having real conversations about some of this. Like, and to give a quick example, out of the organization I mentioned, Profound Gentlemen, they recently had a conference, an assembly, excuse me, here in Atlanta a couple of weeks ago, and as part of that, invited some local high school young men, and they were in conversation with educators, and one of the young men um, said a number of them appreciated being in this space, and one of the things one young man said was that, hey, it was so cool to hear male educators of color talking about having a passion and having a calling and feeling like this is their purpose and those kinds of things. And so we got to have those conversations, right? We could talk about the challenges around money, but also, why does somebody like myself or somebody else stay in this field? What does it mean? What does it mean to follow some of your interests? What does it mean to put multiple interests together? I think Mark is a great example here, talking about dropping an album, right? We're talking about being a doc, and there's multiple ways to combine those. And so even in education, it's not just about, hey, this one piece, this one thing. You have a number of interests. How do we explore that? How do we set you up to pursue that and encourage that, and whatever makes sense, and then put the resources together for you.
You said something early on in the conversation that I think is key. You recognize it as a calling and not necessarily just as a career. It's just something that I'm not complete if I don't, I don't want to go to my grave having not released everything that I was called and or created to release. And given that type of perspective, there's so many people who sacrifice their calling for money, for better compensation. So you never want to compromise your calling for compensation. And I like to do this alliteration thing, so I had to throw that in. And by the way, thank you for the promo. I appreciate it.
I was gonna say we probably people put that line on repeat.
I know. We gotta throw it in there. Yeah.
But do speak on that, Colin, because I think that's very important. I don't think we are teaching enough about your values or your calling or and I hate to use the word passion because your calling could not be your passion. But I don't think we talk
a bad
about
situation.
But I don't think, but I do think as men, and I know y'all will correct me if I'm wrong, you want to lead or you want to feel as if, hey, I am guiding a group of people to do good. And so, I mean, talk about what it means to be called to do something and how that drives you.
Yeah. I say I'm blessed, right, to be in this position to, finally move forward in this calling. And and just some things, while are challenging, have become easier, right? Um, pushing myself on a daily basis, thinking about goals, thinking about the work that I'm doing, it just becomes easy to drive. It's motivating. It keeps me up at night sometimes thinking about it. I get up early, wanted to take action on certain things. And so it's exciting. I mean, it's absolutely exciting. And so getting to live life some and just realizing more about what's important. And yes, of course, money is important, but it's also the joy and the excitement that knowing that you're doing what you feel you're called and supposed to be doing. I wouldn't replace. Um, the challenge when we think about young students again is, money, and it's not just in the space, but money is a predominant topic, right? It's in society, in this culture. And I'll take my story, like even for me, like I said, wanting to be cool or do some things different before leaning in. A lot of it was about concerns about money, and wanting to have things and be able to purchase things or have and just getting too caught up in other stuff. And so we got to have a real conversation, not just from this field, but with people in other fields that have answered their call about why, what it means, and also to say, yes, I know this is a concern. Like we can't ignore money or any other concern. Like, yes, I know this is a concern, but I tell you what, I'll sit with you and I'll help you make a plan, right? I'll help you figure this out. We'll talk about this as a full pathway. We'll help point you to resources, um, so that it's not all on your shoulders and it's trying to make these decisions about one versus the other, and giving you time and also recognize that people make mistakes. Sometimes we find our calling or later on or early on, and it's okay. Like all of that is okay, and we got to say that sometimes it's okay.
As a physician, it's interesting because I've done this long enough now where I was seeing patients when they were young children, and now they're
Okay.
old and they're bringing their children to see me, and I'm like, oh my God, this is really crazy. But I ran into a former teacher just a couple of weeks ago in Cincinnati, and it's amazing to me that now 35 years later or 37 years later after an interaction, she still remembers a certain group number of people. And I'm not sure how teachers do that. I have no idea how you can remember somebody that you taught in the 10th or 11th grade now 30 years later. I don't know, is that a testament to the teacher, or do you remember all of your students that way? And what's the feeling? And maybe you're too young to know what it's like to, teach some young child and then later on see them in their full grown state and be proud, like, hey, I had a part in this.
Yeah, so you do remember students, some for different reasons, right? Some were trying to figure out more things out a little bit more than others at that particular time, and so you're definitely excited when you. But any of your students doing great things. I wish I think that's for me. I don't remember all of them. We meet and see and they share things. It's like, oh yeah. Um, but I think there's a lot that I remember. I think there's a lot that other teachers remember. And again, it's a testament to the investment that teachers are making, in their work and in each student's life. Like this is deep work. This is and for a lot of educators and teachers, it's deeply personal work that's meaningful to them. And so, the time you see, the time outside of the working outside of the classroom is all about moving students forward and wanting to see students grow and learn and develop. And so, yeah, you definitely remember um, a lot because it's been a deep investment. And for me, my students, yes, some of them are old enough. They're out, they have kids and family of their own, and it's always it always is so meaningful when they share something with you. Or with me about their experience. And sometimes it's things that I didn't even remember and I didn't even know what would mean so much to them. And that's the thing. And that's it's about being a teacher. Like we're planting and an educator, we're planting seeds.
Hmm.
And we don't know when they're going to grow. We don't know if we don't know what may grow, but it's we're charged with on a regular basis, continue plant those seeds, put things out there, be positive, be kind, be supportive, um, and the hopes and honestly the faith that it's going to be meaningful and impactful in a student's life that resonates with them, and that's what we do.
I'm glad you said that it's planting a seed, because even as you were talking, the thing that I was hearing was like, it's not just instruction, it's impartation. And you're really giving a part of who you are into that person's life, and that investment. I commend you for that as well. Now, one of the things that's in the news these days that a lot of Republicans are pushing is these school vouchers. And we've got actually a lot of school teachers and public school teachers who are actually on the podcast today as well. And you all feel free to also chime in on this. But I'm wondering, as an educator, what are some of the nuances and some of the potential fallout of this push to try to have school vouchers and eliminate public education as a whole? How do we fix that problem? And are we going down a slippery slope? And what do you see? What do you foresee as being some of the drawbacks or benefits of it?
Yeah, yeah. I kind of come at it from this angle. One is some of what I said before, like these arguments. We have to be honest with ourselves. Are we centering children in this? Are we centering our own adult
Mm,
agendas? As some of other things that we want, right? I think it's also. I think I bring this into the conversation about vouchers. This is school in general, right? Like we know there are different types of school. There's public school, there's charter schools, there's private schools, and there's this part of the voucher debate, one versus the other, this or that. And I think that's where we're setting ourselves up for failure. Like each school is designed or set up in different ways and doing different things, right? Like we we blame public schools, we point a finger at public schools and say public schools are failing. But if we're honest with ourselves, public schools we have to take any and every student, right? Students with special needs, students from, and they be like, public schools have that charge. Charter schools, I taught in charter schools. The reality is that there's some students that don't that even for the great things that we've done, just because say in some years we didn't provide a bus transportation, we know that limited access for certain students, right? If they didn't have their own transportation, they couldn't attend our school, right? Private school, where there's costs or other things involved, or how you can apply and get into a school. And so I think we got to talk more about schools and just being real about them before we point and say that one is better than the other. We got to talk about centering students, and who serves who, and what are the opportunities around it, right? Like as communities say, look, um, before we get the vouchers, before what type of school people are going to serve, like literacy, for example, is important to us, and so we're going to focus on literacy. We're going to support students. We're going to support families. We're going to support schools in that and move in that direction. But before we do so much blaming and trying to put one versus the other, and kind of our own um, adult preferences that are overriding what is really meaningful for students and where they come from and what they need. And I don't know if
it,
that answers or if that yeah.
well, no, it helps. But one of the other things that I'm thinking about is what's the value of having in a single school a population, a diverse population, not just ethnicity, but also amongst the student base, students of different socioeconomic classes. And I'll give a little preface about this. Again, I was fortunate as a high school student to be able to have exposures outside of my high school. I went to a predominantly Black high school. There probably 3 or 4 white people in my graduating class, and we're good friends with all of them as well. See, I have white friends. But
That's great.
I'm not a racist. I have white friends. But everybody I grew up with everybody I attended school basically were all in my neighborhood, and the neighborhoods were so segregated at that point. And I got to participate in extracurricular activities, outward bound, youth and city government, close-up programs where we got to expose ourselves to people from different social economic backgrounds, different races, different geographic locations. And those things I think do actually impart to students um, the idea and the notion that there's something more out there than other than what's in my community. I always say one of the things is that without exposure and opportunity, talent and discipline are wasted. And I think that's what happens with so many of our youth today, is that they have so much talent and they have so much intellect. But if they're never given the exposure to things outside the realm of their communities, they become limited. So is there a way to incorporate and or for the federal government to incentivize um, students or families of higher socioeconomic backgrounds to actually send their children to certain schools where their children can learn and we can elevate the learning experience for all?
Yeah, yeah. Great question. So, can the federal government incentivize um, families to send their students and kids to certain schools? I don't know. I don't know what the right incentive right make. I don't know. Um, but I will say, and what you're speaking to brings up a great point. Like in some spaces and areas, like we think that school segregation ended with Brown versus Board of Education, but based on our own choices, segregate. We have in some places more segregated schools than there were at that time or right after, right? So, um, I think it's again what matters to us as a society, what matters to us as a country, um, and we start there, right? Like it's the perception of, oh, I will be sending my kids to um, a certain community, or we have this perception again around public schools or certain neighborhoods and everything. When there's a lot more to think, right? There's incredible teachers, incredible staff doing great work, and your students could benefit from being in those environments. Um, we think about again, education touches so much. Like if we think about the conversation around gentrification, right? If we think about where some of the neighborhoods are starting to change and become more diverse, years before that, people have said, no, those schools are terrible, those schools are bad, those schools are, different things. But then a couple years later, we have a more diverse population and people willing to be in there, and then things and some mind change. And so it's a benefit, it's an opportunity for us together. I think putting people together, you begin to see that there are some of the differences that are talked about in the media, the politics, the this side versus that side are less salient when we're coming together around what's best for our kids. And so those are the conversations, those are the spaces we need to be best for our kids. And if we start there, your kids, my kids, somebody else's kids, how do we all come together and wrap our arms around it? Then I think that changes the dynamic and makes it a little bit easier because it becomes clear about what we need to do.
So before we conclude, I did want to read a comment from one of our listeners and viewers
Yeah.
who is an educator as well. I think it's really profound, and get your thoughts on this, your closing thoughts as well. She says, literacy doesn't just mean the ability to read, but also to offer students opportunity to apply to real life situations. It takes work to involve partnerships in the community, but it's well worth it.
Well said, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
right.
I mean, that's it. Like we can sum it all up in that regard. Like literacy is critical. It is about more than reading. It's reading, writing, communicating. It's a passport to different spaces. It's a pathway to different spaces, right? We think about careers. Everybody on this call, literacy and reading is and communicating and writing is um, an important function of it. It's needed. Technology, all those things. It's still needed, and it means so much. And so it's an opportunity for us to come together collectively and focus in an area that will support and build our communities locally and more broadly. So yeah, absolutely well said and agree there. Um, so yeah, and if we close, if I could give a quick plug, is that all right?
I was about to ask you to do precisely that,
Come
as a
on,
matter of
come
fact.
on, come on. So yeah, we like I said, our program Literacy Lab is an organization. Our program has a Leading Men Fellowship. We're currently hiring young men of color, ages 18 to 24, without bachelor's degrees to work as pre-K literacy tutors for a full school year. It's paid. We also provide college scholarships, significant training, significant support, and other areas just besides what the classroom work. Um, we love to talk to folks, and also just want to be involved, learn more about what we're doing at the Literacy Lab. We having a campaign going on as we celebrate 15 years with the organization, and it's called Answer the Call. More information can be found at answerthecall.theliteracylab.org. And it's, our way of saying, hey, again, literacy is important. Having more male educators of color, important. Hearing the stories and supporting these fellows are important. And so, getting on this page, opportunities to donate, sign up to become mentors, apply to be Leading Men Fellows. We just got a couple opportunities on there. So definitely encourage folks to check us out. And
is this a nonprofit organization?
Yes, we are.
And so you do accept donations as well.
Absolutely. Great question. We do, for sure. So it can go to that page and make that happen for anybody who wants to do so.
Man, that's great work that you're doing. I so appreciate what you're I'm going to go on that page and make a donation myself. So, because I think what you're doing is incredible. So,
from someone who went through the pandemic and had to teach his.
He felt that. I saw it. Yeah. When I brought that up, I felt that come through strong. Like, I know. Yeah.
Well, actually, I didn't have to, but I did have employees who had to bring their children to work with them, and so I was like, "Ooh, go back to school, pay your teacher more. I'll pay them myself."
Come on. We understand. Yeah, that's it.
Thanks so much for joining us here on the Roundtable Consult, and more importantly, thank you for the work that you're doing, inspiring our youth and inspiring teachers. Teachers need to be inspired by other teachers, and I think you're doing a wonderful job doing that. You certainly have done that on this podcast today. Wish you the best, and God bless you.
Absolutely. Appreciate y'all. Thank y'all so much, Sonia, Mark. Keep doing what y'all doing as well. Pleasure being here today.
Yes.
Thank you. All right, so we've got Beyonce dropping an album, you dropping an album.
Well, she wanted to drop her album on the same day that I did. So I was like, okay, B.
More information. We just we got positivity coming at the end of the week, despite the end of the week, right?
She is my one competition right now.
Oh, really,
Beyonce. Just a little bit.
So your Mickey Guthrie that you mentioned a lot, she received a bouquet of flowers and posted it. So you might want to, if Beyonce is your competition, you might want to send her some flowers.
Is that right? Mickey didn't drop mine.
Did you send her flowers? I'm saying Beyonce sent her flowers.
Oh, shoot, I had to send her
thank her for the contributions she's made in the music space.
Well, well, I'll have to find another way. I don't want to copy Beyonce sing. So anyway.
This has been such a good, discussion today, and hopefully we can have it again.
Definitely.
All right. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. Please continue to like, comment, and subscribe, not only to here on Facebook, but also to our YouTube, to your favorite podcast platform. And make sure you tune into a repeat of this episode on Star Radio. So until next Saturday, 11 a.m. Eastern Time, 10 a.m. Central Standard Time, hope you have a blessed week.